Hello everybody, I am Julian from Gamers Time, and today I'm going to be covering E3 2016. Now, instead of going through all of the conferences separately, I'm actually going to be going through all of them together, and just giving a few thoughts on each of them, as well as sharing a few of the highlights of each. Now, if you don't know what E3 is, E3 is a convention for people in the gaming industry. It is more centered around the actual business of it and just showing off new games, instead of showing stuff to the mass. Therefore, there are very few passes given out to the public. It's more for press people or for people who are actually big parts of game companies. So the first conference we're going to be covering is actually what I would consider to be the weakest. We're going to be covering the Electronic Arts, or EA, conference. So initially, their announcer was actually very confident. He knew what he was saying, but his script was just a bit too preachy, and it just went on longer than it should have about stuff that had nothing to do with video games. Some of the highlights for me, however, was a game called Fee. This was a video game that had a very cutesy art style, and if you've seen anything about it, you would agree. It's very dark in most of its color, but that actually helps the game immensely, because the few colors that are in the game pop so vibrantly that it really draws your attention, and that's really cool. Now, aside from that, it looks interesting. It's very blocky in its graphics, which I think is very, it's meant to be like that. But, I don't know, I would have liked it to be a bit smoother. It seemed very polygonal, if that makes any sense whatsoever. But yeah, so that's just a few thoughts on that. And the second highlight was they showed a trailer for Mass Effect Andromeda. And it was only a trailer. I would have wished there would have been more gameplay for it. But overall, what can you do? Now, the trailer looked very promising. It showed 2 new characters, and I'm excited to see where the story goes, because we're now moving away from Commander Shepard. Now, also, the final highlight for the conference was Battlefield 1, as you would expect. All the Battlefield games are generally pretty fun to play. They're good, solid first-person shooters with very good environment destruction. However, this one was kind of... The trailers that they showed were kind of lackluster. They also showed 2 trailers that, for the most part, were the exact same, which very much confused me. I don't know why they did that. But it overall looked like a very promising game. They introduced the fact that there would be huge 64-player games, and I'm very excited for that. It looks like it could be a very good game. Now, there was only a few technical difficulties. Actually, really only one. The only difficulty that I actually ever saw in it was the fact that at one point, you could actually hear the announcer's voice twice, which was kind of disconcerting, but it only lasted for a few seconds before it was fixed, so it was fine. Also, something very interesting that they did is they had 2 conferences going at the same time. They had one over in London, England, and they also had one in LA at the actual E3 conference. Now, what they did is they would have, say, the one in LA, they would cover, say, Battlefield 1, but then the one over in London would be covering Fee, and there was like a feed at the very top that would show you it, and they would do it at separate times, so they had it coordinated very, very well. But overall, I just believe that this conference was just lackluster, but it did have a few very cool highlights about it that did make it worth watching. Now, moving on to the Bethesda conference, the host did not seem very confident. He stuttered a lot when he spoke, and he did not seem comfortable whatsoever being up on the stage in front of all those people. Now, despite that, this was probably the best conference of this E3. Now, the reason for that is they had some of the coolest announcements, as well as just really cool gameplay. Now, the first big highlight for me, at least, was the announcement of the Elder Scrolls V Special Edition. I'd always been a fan of Skyrim, and they announced that the Special Edition will come out with not only improved graphics, but also will come included with all 3 DLCs, which is awesome. So you don't have to spend extra money on getting the DLCs, you just buy the game, and then boom, you have them all already on disc. Now, that's really cool overall, but the next thing they announced was a DLC, not for Skyrim, but for Elder Scrolls Online. Now, the Elder Scrolls Online is an MMORPG based in the Elder Scrolls world, which is really cool. They announced that they'd be releasing the Dark Brotherhood DLC. Now, the Dark Brotherhood is very, very cool, because the Dark Brotherhood is usually the best quest line in any Elder Scrolls game that has it. Skyrim, for example, was definitely my favorite storyline. So I'm really excited to see the Elder Scrolls Online because on the initial launch, I was kind of bored of it. It was very lackluster, and there was also some partying issues. When you first started the game, when it was first launched, there was 3 separate factions, and each faction only had 3 separate races you can choose from. Meaning if you loved to play as one race, and your friend loved to play in another race, you weren't the same faction, meaning that you couldn't party up with that person, which was a big pain, because we all like to play separate races. But they also announced that you can now party up with anyone, as well as go to any area in the game at any level, making it a lot more accessible. So that'll be very interesting overall to see how that turns out. Now, what was probably the biggest highlight and biggest announcement was the fact of Dishonored 2. Now, this new game will take place in a new country called Karnaca, which is a lot like Dunwall from the first game, but it's just like, it's the sister country, I think, is what they said. And now also there will be 2 playable characters, so you can play as Corvo from the first game, which is cool, but now you can also play as Emily. Now, if you remember Emily, she was the little girl in the first game that your whole goal was to save her. So you can play as her now, and that's really cool. In terms of powers, Emily will have a bunch of new powers, and Corvo will have the same powers, but Corvo's powers have apparently been like super powered now, so who knows what that means. With that, they're probably just a lot more powerful. And overall, it just looks like a very cool, interesting game. So I'm excited for that. The only problem with it is that it took up about a third of their entire conference, which I wish it didn't. I wish they had gone and covered more games. But overall, I'm very excited for it to actually come out. Now, Bethesda also announced that they will be releasing the HTC Vive. Or at least full support for it, which is very cool. Fallout 4 will be coming to it, and it's really interesting. I'm excited for that. Aside from that, they only had one technical difficulty. It was pretty big, though. One of their videos for, I think it was Quake Champions, the video actually crashed, so that was kind of interesting. But aside from that, the conference went off really well. And overall, I was very pleased by this, and it was a lot of fun to watch. I would definitely recommend going through it and looking at all the different games that they announced, as well as all of the tech and all of the interesting things that happened during the conference. Now, the next conference I'm going to be covering is the Nintendo conference. Now, the Nintendo conference was very different from the other ones because it actually took place on the convention floor, which was very cool. And it also allowed the guests to actually play the games. Now, unlike the other conferences that showed off multiple games, the Nintendo conference only actually showed off 2, but it went very in-depth for each of them, which was very interesting. I honestly think I preferred this over the way the other ones were, where they focused on 2 games and they showed you a bunch about it. Now, the first game they showed off was Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon, and if you know how Pokemon games work, they're the 2 counterparts of the same game, essentially. Now, for these games, they showed off the new starters, which were Rowlet, who is a very cute grass-flying type, and he's a cool little cute owl. It was awesome. Now, the next starter was Litten, who is an adorable little fire-type kitty, and I'm really excited for that. Now, the third and final starter was Popplio, who is a sea lion. And honestly, I like the design of the other 2. I do not like the design of Popplio whatsoever. I think it's a bit too weird and gimmicky. It definitely looks still like a water type Pokemon, and it's very cool, but I just did not like it. It's not my kind of design. They also showed off some really cool in-game art, like they showed off the battle system, and now in the actual battle screen, you will be standing behind your Pokemon, which is cool because it's never actually been done in a Pokemon game. They also showed off once again that you can customize your characters just like in Pokemon X and Y. Now, when Pokemon Oris was released, and you actually could not customize your characters anymore. But now, again, you're going to be able to customize your characters, which is really cool. And I'm excited for that. The biggest announcement they had for Pokemon Sun and Moon, for competitive anyways, was that there will now be free-for-all battles, which I'm really excited for. So, Pokemon before didn't have FFAs. FFAs is a really fun way to fight, where it's 4 players against each other, and I'm really excited for that. Now, the second and final game they showed was Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, this game looks absolutely stunning. It has an amazing art style, stunning graphics, and beautiful looking landscapes. Now, I don't know what this will actually be like in the final version of the game, but so far, it looks awesome. It also has multiple mechanics that we haven't seen in a Zelda game yet, which is really cool. This includes being able to tame wild horses. Usually only you have your one horse, and that's fine. But now you can choose the horse you want. You can also have multiple of them. Based on what the trailer showed us, also, you'll be able to cut down trees, which will be really cool. As well as you can now climb anything. Any surface will now be climbable by Link, and that's really awesome. Now, some features of Breath of the Wild is now you can still change your outfits. They also introduced a paraglider, which is really cool. Allows you to go around and paraglide. Also, this game has probably the largest variety of weapons from any Zelda game yet. This game will introduce not only the basic, sword, but there's also going to be great swords, and there's going to be axes, and there's also spears, which is really cool. Now, in this demo, and during the trailer, you saw an old rusted Master Sword, which makes me believe that maybe you won't be able to use it, or you're going to have to repair it before you can actually use it in combat. The only tech problem they had was they had slight crackling and feedback from the mics during the Pokemon Sun and Moon demonstration, but overall it did not take away from the conference at all. This conference, though very different, was way more enjoyable to watch than most of them, aside from probably Bethesda, and I'm excited for the games that they showed to actually be released. I'm really excited, and I think this will be awesome to do and see again, if they do it again next year. Now, the next conference was the Microsoft conference. Now, the host of the Microsoft conference was very confident, and he knew exactly what he was saying. Now, despite having a very good host, the whole conference ended up kind of falling flat. This was due to a few lackluster games, aside from 2 of them, and overall it was just very whelming. It wasn't overwhelming, it wasn't underwhelming, it was just whelming. It was just it was okay, it wasn't amazing, it wasn't terrible. Now, on the topic of the 2 games that were interesting, the first one was Dead Rising 4. Now, again, this just looks like more Dead Rising. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The Dead Rising series has always had really good gameplay, as well as some very fun characters and fun weaponry to use, and overall, they've always just been kind of like these jokey kind of zombie games. Now, this one takes place during Christmas, so there will be a fun amount of like Christmassy items that you can use, probably like a few Santa heads that you can use as shock zombies and stuff, as well as it actually has the return of Frank West. Now, the Frank West is, if you don't know, Frank West is the character from the very first game, and he makes a reappearance, which will be a lot of fun to see. It just looks like a fun continuation to the series, but it could always fall prey to a lackluster sequel like a lot of other games have, sadly. Now, the other game that looked really interesting to me was We Happy Few. Now, We Happy Few looks like it has a very happy, cartoony art style. However, you can tell that it's set in a dystopian future. Everyone's forced to take a drug called Joy. And Joy basically just, from what we get, is that it shows the world in a way more positive light than it actually is. And then you play as a character who you decide to not take your joy that day. And slowly, as the drug kind of fully wears off and makes its way out of your system, you start to see the world as it actually is. You find this out when a pinata that you just smacked, turns out that when you actually get rid of it and it's gone, actually turns out to be a dead freaking rat, and the people are like just eating its flesh raw, which is disgusting and it's terrible. And then you also learn that people who don't take their joy are called downers, and it's actually illegal to not take your joy. So then security and the cops start to chase after you, and it's just very cool. I'm very excited to see it. It looks very interesting. It looks more like a psychological horror game. I'm very excited to see what it is. Now, overall, this conference was okay. I wouldn't call it, again, like, I wouldn't call it amazing. It was just kind of bland. Had a few interesting looking games. It's not really worth watching this conference, actually. Unlike the EA conference, it just did not have enough redeeming factors about it. That makes me think that you should actually watch the whole conference. Maybe just check out the trailers for the games that were announced for it. Now, the fifth and the second last conference I'm going to be covering was the Sony conference. Now, the host himself seemed very confident. However, when he decided to stop talking, or like he stopped talking overall, the pauses in between the actual talks were very long, and it kind of got to an awkward silence, which is not something you want to happen. Now, what was very interesting about this is instead of having pre-recorded music for their trailers and their gameplay, they actually had a live orchestra playing there for it, which was very, very cool, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. Another interesting thing is that instead of spacing everything out and talking about each game a lot, they actually showed all the trailers at the very beginning, which was very interesting, and it was also a very good, but also was a very bad thing. Now, it was a good thing because at the very beginning, it kept my interest the entire time. It was cool. It was showing us new games every 3 or 4 minutes after the trailer was done. It'd be like, boom, new game. Sometimes they had gameplay, which was very, very cool. However, it was kind of bad because by the second half, I was very bored and it couldn't keep my attention nearly as well because everything at the very beginning was very, very cool. However, despite this, it was very interesting and they had quite a few highlights about them. The first highlight being a new God of War game. It was a trailer and then it was actual gameplay, which was very, very cool. The biggest issue, the gameplay looked very fluid, had some nice animation, some cool looking graphics. However, my biggest issue is that each time you would kill someone, there would be like a little cutscene that played, and that would take the control away from you. And that is a big issue in my mind. It just seemed like it would take it away too often, especially if it's after you kill each enemy. It just would get boring, and you'd eventually see all of them, and it takes control away from you, like I said, which makes it a lot less fun to play, because it feels more like it's on autopilot than it is like you actually playing. Overall, it did look very interesting, cool though. So, yeah. The next interesting thing they showed was Horizon Zero Dawn. Now, Horizon Zero Dawn is a game I've been anticipating for a long time. It's a very cool setting, being like a prehistoric thing, but with like robots and stuff attacking. Who knows how they got there? Aliens, maybe. All the animations of the game looked very smooth, with some gorgeous graphics and some very fluid-looking combat. The only issue I had with the actual thing overall was some of the weird facial expressions that happened, but during the animation, when she was talking, or when it was supposed to show a certain kind of emotion on her, there was just some very weird animations, which will hopefully be fixed before the game comes out. Overall, it looks very cool and very interesting. Now, the third highlight for this entire conference was Detroit Become Human, which is a big choice-based game where you play as a professional negotiator, and depending on the choices you make leading up to and also during the confrontation with the person you need to be talking to kind of stop them from doing whatever they're doing, you can get many different endings. Other than that, it only showed us a very short amount of gameplay and a trailer. It was very interesting, and I really enjoyed it, and you get many different endings from the game. Now, other than that, all the games had short trailers and didn't really have much said about them, which was really which really sucked because a lot of the games looked really cool. I would just like to have heard more about them. Overall, the conference was very interesting, and it was very cool to hear about the new games, the few that we did hear about coming out. I would recommend watching this for yourself, just so you can get a bit of a feel of what it was actually like. Now, the final conference was the Ubisoft conference. The host for the Ubisoft conference was, as it has been for quite a while, it was Aisha Tyler, and she's very funny and she's very professional, but she's very relaxed and is not afraid to drop a few curse words, which is really cool because not many conferences or hosts will actually do that. Now, one of the highlights for it was the Just Dance people coming in and dancing to Just Dance. It was very interesting. That game is going to be released in 2017, and it'll be very, very cool. Now, the biggest kind of drop that they had was South Park: The Fractured But Whole. It looks very interesting, and it also has that very important humor, because that's what the whole South Park world's really about. It's all about humor and having a fun, good time. It also looks the same as the Stick of Truth, just with a bit more deeper combat, and I'm really excited for that. Overall, it looks to be a very promising game, and I am excited to see what happens next. It looks to be also a very jokey thing, raking on Marvel and DC and their cinematic universes. From what we saw, they're like trying to put together a whole superhero franchise and be like, this movie here, this movie there, which that could be very funny, and then like there's a huge fight and they break. Now, for fans of the Star Trek fandom, you'll be very happy to know that there is a new Star Trek game coming out called Star Trek Bridge Crew, and it's for VR, which is really cool. If you like VR, then you're going to be very into it, which is very cool. There wasn't really much said about it, just it's a cool looking VR game. The next one is a game called Steep, which is it's a sports game going downhill on a snowboard. I've never really enjoyed those games. I find none of them are really super well made, but who knows, maybe this one will change my thing on it. It goes between like either third person or a GoPro view, which is kind of cool. There's also paragliding, and you can also just do some really cool stuff. Overall, E3 2016 was a very fun experience and a very interesting showcases of many different upcoming games from many different companies. I hope to be able to review it again next year when it actually comes, and this was a lot of fun. I would recommend watching all of them except for really the Microsoft conference to get a view of all the games. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.